February the 2nd, 2026. A moving truck pulls away from Royal Lodge. According to reporting, Prince Andrew Mountbatten Windsor is leaving Royal Lodge. Not like a normal move, but under pressure that is now impossible to ignore. 72 hours earlier, a second woman came forward. What she described changed the entire picture. She was in her 20s. Her lawyer, Brad Edwards, says Epstein sent her to Andrew. She claims she stayed overnight at Royal Lodge, the home of a prince. And the next morning, Brad Edwards says she was given a tour of Buckingham Palace with tea. That is one of the most explosive claims so far. But it does not stop there. According to a letter dated 2011 from attorney William Vogler, a now deceased woman said that Andrew and Epstein asked her to join them for a threesome. She described a party with young women dressed provocatively. Some looked as young as 14. In emails, Andrew wrote to Epstein, "Wish I was still a pet in your family." A prince called himself a pet, writing to a man who had already been convicted of sex with a minor. Read that again. Stay with me, because a former prince is being erased in real time, and his former wife brought their daughters to lunch with Jeffrey Epstein shortly after he was released from prison. Because this is not only about Andrew. This is about Sarah Ferguson. In July 2009, she brings Beatrice and Eugenie to lunch with Jeffrey Epstein. This is shortly after he was released from prison for sexually abusing a minor. Why would a mother do that? Because she needed money. In emails to Epstein, Sarah Ferguson writes, "Just marry me. I'm at your service." She begs him for £20,000 for rent because her landlord was threatening to go to the newspapers. She calls him the brother I always wished for. And then this. In an email, she congratulates Epstein on baby boy. What exactly that meant is unclear, but it shows how close this contact was. Stop right there. Your former husband is accused of sexually abusing a minor. The man who enabled him has just been released from prison. And you bring your daughters to lunch with him, and you write, "Marry me." But there is more. In an email from March 2010, quoted in reporting about the released Epstein materials, Sarah Ferguson writes to Epstein, "Not sure yet, just waiting for Eugenie to come back from a shagging weekend." Eugenie was 19 at the time. An email to a convicted sex offender about the sex life of a young royal. What kind of relationship is this? How deep was this family inside Epstein's world? Because Andrew was not just an acquaintance. He was legitimacy, a signal that Epstein had access to people who seemed untouchable. To understand why this moment is so dangerous for Andrew, we need to rewind. He was once a respected figure, a Falklands war veteran, a working royal with an official public role. But he also seemed to crave a life outside palace rules, a life where status opens doors and nobody ever says no. That hunger helps explain how someone like Jeffrey Epstein could get close. The relationship began around 1999 through Ghislaine Maxwell. Maxwell functioned as a gatekeeper in Epstein's world. She moved people into elite circles, arranged introductions, made it all feel normal. For Epstein, Andrew was more than a friend. He was legitimacy, a signal. For Andrew, Epstein offered a different kind of oxygen: private jets, luxury homes, travel, powerful contacts, and that intoxicating feeling of being treated like the most important man in the room. But Epstein was a collector of access, not only money. He wanted immunity, and if you place a British prince in that orbit, you get cover. Victims describe the effect simply. When powerful people stand around someone, the danger feels less believable and resistance feels pointless. The emails between Andrew and Epstein show just how close this relationship was. Andrew writes, "God, it's cold and dank here." He invites Epstein to dinner at Buckingham Palace. Epstein replies, "I'm with the girls, can I bring them all?" Andrew answers, "Bring them." Read that line again. Epstein asks if he can bring all the girls to Buckingham Palace, and Andrew says yes. Which girls were these? How old were they? And who knew? Because this was happening in the heart of the British monarchy, not on a private island inside Buckingham Palace. The most serious allegations come from Virginia Giuffre. She said that as a minor, she was trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, and that she was forced into sexual contact with the prince. Her account described 3 encounters, one in 2001 at Maxwell's home in London when she was 17, a second in New York, and a third on Little St. James, Epstein's private island. Prince Andrew denies the allegations and says he never met Giuffre. He also said he could not remember the photo that became impossible to ignore. The Pizza Express alibi turned into a cultural punchline. The claim was that he was at a pizza restaurant in Woking that night. Is that your alibi as a Royal Pizza Express? For years, Andrew questioned the authenticity of the photo. He suggested it could have been manipulated. No memory, no proof it was not edited. But then more material surfaced. An email from Maxwell to Epstein from 2015. In that email, described as a draft statement, Maxwell refers to a meeting in London with Prince Andrew. She writes that a photo was taken. Reporting suggests that the redacted name was Giuffre. Maxwell also wrote that she did not see anything inappropriate happening in her home. But here is the point. It does not read like clarity. It reads like damage control. Because in another email, Maxwell wrote that people wanted her to say she did not know about a massage with Andrew in her home. Stop. Read that sentence again. People wanted her to say she did not know. That one line does not prove everything, but it adds proximity, and proximity destroys denial. By 2019, the damage was already massive. After the BBC interview, which was widely seen as a disaster, Andrew stepped back from royal duties. Many viewers felt they were watching a man detached from victims, focused on self-preservation, unable to show basic empathy. One of the strangest moments. Andrew claimed he could not sweat because of a medical condition from the Falklands War. Giuffre had described him sweating during their alleged encounter, a prince using his military service to counter an allegation. Sit with that for a moment. In 2022, Andrew was stripped of his military titles and patronages. He could no longer use His Royal Highness in any official capacity. That is the monarchy telling you, quietly but clearly, you are on your own. Also, in 2022, Andrew reached a settlement with Giuffre in a civil case. The terms remained confidential. He admitted no wrongdoing, but he did acknowledge her suffering as a victim of trafficking. The settlement prevented a public trial, but it did not buy peace. It did not stop the questions. And now there is new fuel. In the released Department of Justice files, there is video material. The media describe it this way: Andrew on his hands and knees, leaning over someone on the floor, his hand resting on her waist or stomach. The media also stress that the context, the date, and the identity in that footage have not been publicly established. For many people, that makes his earlier denials even harder to accept. And then the second woman comes forward. Her lawyer, Brad Edwards, confirms that she was in her 20s when Epstein sent her to Andrew in 2010. She claims she stayed overnight at Royal Lodge. The next morning, she was given a tour of Buckingham Palace and tea. As far as the public record currently shows, this is the first time someone has explicitly claimed that sexual contact occurred inside a royal residence. Edwards is considering a lawsuit. And if that happens, details become public. But it does not stop there. According to a 2011 letter from attorney William Vogler, a now deceased woman claimed that Andrew and Epstein asked her for various sex acts at a party. Young women were dressed provocatively. Some looked as young as 14. They asked for a threesome. They invited her to the Virgin Islands. She refused. But how many others did not refuse? Virginia, Geoffrey claimed that Andrew's presence made victims think, if a prince is here, it cannot be wrong. How many young women ended up inside Epstein's web because of that thought? And here is where it becomes legally sensitive. If these claims are true, this could fall under the Official Secrets Act. According to reporting, British authorities are reviewing claims that in 2010, Andrew sent confidential documents to Epstein. At the time, he was serving as a special representative for international trade and investment. In November 2010, Andrew sent visit reports about Vietnam, Singapore, and Hong Kong to Epstein within 5 minutes. In December 2010, he sent a confidential brief about investment in Helmand, Afghanistan. This is described as confidential government information about a conflict in which British soldiers were fighting. Why would a prince do this? What did he get in return? Was there quid pro quo? If that is true, this is no longer just a scandal, it becomes a state matter. At the same time, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer called for Andrew to testify before the US Congress about his ties to Epstein. A sitting Prime Minister publicly urging a former royal to appear before a foreign Congress, that is extraordinary. The message is clear. This is no longer just reputation management. This is political. And according to reporting, US Vice President J.D. Vance responded positively to that call. So the pressure is coming from every direction now, from victims, from the media, from investigators, from politics, and from inside Buckingham Palace itself. In early February 2026, this file tilts. Buckingham Palace signalled that it stands ready to support police if they make contact, but said the specific claims must be answered by Andrew himself. Read that sentence again. The specific claims must be answered by Andrew himself. That is not what royal protection normally sounds like. That sounds like distance. That sounds like a line being drawn, and it did not happen in isolation. The same day, Prince William and Princess Catherine expressed deep concern for Epstein's victims. Not for Andrew, for the victims. The question is not only what the public thinks. The real question is whether the institution has decided that Andrew now threatens its own survival. And when the palace starts treating a royal as a problem to be managed, things often move fast. That is why Andrew left Royal Lodge on February 2nd, deeply humiliating according to sources. He moved to Sandringham, the king's private estate, from his own home to the king's private estate, out of sight, and it seems tighter inside palace boundaries. Geoffrey's family, after her tragic death in 2025, called this a moment of vindication. Her brother, Sky Roberts, along with US Senator Chuck Schumer, called for a formal examination of Andrew by the US Congress. There are even reports that a group called Republic is considering a private prosecution. So this is not fading, it is sharpening. And the question now is not only whether Andrew had disastrous judgment. The question is whether legal lines were crossed, whether sensitive information was shared, whether abuse was facilitated inside royal residences. Because this is bigger than one man. It is also about Sarah Ferguson, whose charity Sarah's Trust was closed this week. She begged Epstein for £20,000. She wrote, "Just marry me," 6 months after he left prison. She brought her daughters to lunch with a convicted sex offender. It is about a system that could look away for years, protect powerful people and let silence do the work. But tolerance for silence is collapsing. Look at what is happening to Prince Andrew. From respected royal to exiled man. From His Royal Highness to someone whose name is barely spoken in official language. From Royal Lodge to a house on Sandringham, where he is kept out of sight. And when an institution like the monarchy chooses survival over loyalty, you are watching the beginning of a new era. Because the question is not whether Andrew is guilty. A court may never decide that. He settled, he denies, and he stays silent. The question is what we tolerate as a society. How much protection do the powerful deserve? And what responsibility does a monarchy have when one of its own becomes a risk? Where is the line between protection and complicity? Andrew lost his titles, his home, his reputation. But he does not testify. He does not appear before the US Congress. He does not answer questions. Is exile enough? Or should there be real accountability? Because if powerful people can hide behind silence and settlements, what does that tell victims? What does it tell anyone who has watched power being abused and stopped believing anything would happen? This moment is bigger than Andrew. This is a test for the monarchy, for the legal system, for the media, and for all of us. Subscribe to this channel because this story is not over. In the coming weeks, there will be more releases, more documents, more pressure. If you want the broader context behind everything you just heard, my previous video on Jeffrey Epstein, his network, and how he got away with systematic abuse for years is already live. Watch that after this video. In the comments, tell me, is exile enough, or should Andrew testify before the US Congress? Share this video if you think this information matters, because this is journalism. We pull the curtain back. We show what happens behind palace walls. We will keep following documents, statements, and new developments until the full picture becomes clear, until the next update.